The fluorescent lights in Terminal C cast everything in that harsh, institutional white that made even healthy people look sickly. Rebecca Martinez stood in the security line at Denver International Airport, her worn denim jacket pulled tight around her shoulders, watching the TSA agents process travelers with mechanical efficiency. The morning rush was in full swing, business travelers checking their watches impatiently, while families juggled strollers and carry-on bags through the serpentine queue. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, feeling the familiar ache in her left hip that always flared up when she stood too long. The pain was a constant companion now, had been for 3 years, but she'd learned to mask it behind a neutral expression. People didn't want to see weakness, especially not in someone who looked like her, mid-40s, Hispanic, wearing clothes that had seen better days, and carrying a backpack that had clearly traveled more miles than most people's cars. The line moved forward in increments. A businessman, in an expensive suit, breezed through the metal detector ahead of her, his leather briefcase and polished shoes marking him as someone who belonged in this world of air travel and important destinations. Behind her, a young couple discussed their vacation plans to Seattle, their voices bright with the kind of anticipation that comes from having enough money to take trips for pleasure rather than necessity. Rebecca pulled her boarding pass from her jacket pocket for the 3rd time, checking the gate number even though she'd memorized it. Gate B47. Her flight to Portland didn't leave for another 2 hours. But she'd learned long ago that arriving early prevented complications. Complications had a way of spiraling when you didn't have the cushion of resources to absorb them. The TSA checkpoint stretched before her like a gauntlet. 4 lanes of metal detectors, each staffed by agents in blue uniforms who'd seen thousands of faces pass through their stations every day. To them, she was just another passenger, another potential threat to be screened, processed, and waved through. The irony wasn't lost on her. Agent Patricia Williams worked the 3rd lane, her movements practiced and efficient as she directed travelers through the scanner. Quote, Fletcher studied the display, his eyebrows drawing together. In his years of experience, he'd seen every kind of metal detection pattern imaginable: surgical pins, pacemakers, joint replacements, even hidden weapons. But this was different. The metallic signatures appeared in clusters, precise and symmetrical, in locations that didn't match typical medical implants. "Ma'am," Fletcher addressed Rebecca directly, "do you have any medical devices or implants that might trigger our scanners?" Rebecca hesitated for just a moment, not long enough to seem evasive, but enough for Fletcher to notice. "Yes," she said finally, "I have some medical hardware." It was true, as far as it went. What she didn't say was that the hardware wasn't the result of a car accident or degenerative disease. What she didn't say was that each piece of metal in her body told a story that most people couldn't handle hearing. Fletcher nodded, but his expression remained watchful. "We'll need to verify that through additional screening. Agent Williams will escort you to a private area." The private screening room was exactly what Rebecca had expected. Small, sterile, with fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh and clinical. 2 chairs, a table, and medical equipment that looked more intimidating than reassuring. Williams closed the door behind them with a soft click that seemed to seal them off from the normal world of travel and destinations. "I'm going to need you to remove your shoes and any items from your pockets," Williams began, following the standard protocol. "Then we'll proceed with a more detailed scan." Rebecca complied silently, placing her worn sneakers on the table and emptying her pockets of their meager contents: a few bills, some coins, a keychain with 2 keys that unlocked doors to a life most people would consider modest at best. Williams activated the handheld metal detector, a device more sensitive than the archway scanner. As she moved it across Rebecca's body, the machine responded with a symphony of alerts. Beeps from her left shoulder, her right hip, both legs, her torso. Each sound seemed to surprise Williams more than the last. "Ma'am, I've never seen this many alerts from medical devices," Williams said, her professional composure beginning to show cracks of confusion. "Can you explain what type of medical condition would require this much hardware?" Quote, Rebecca looked at the younger woman, seeing in her face the kind of innocence that came from a life lived within the boundaries of normal experience. "How do you explain to someone who's never left the safety of ordinary existence, that some people carry the weight of extraordinary circumstances in their bodies, literally embedded in their bones and tissue. "It's complicated," Rebecca said simply. Williams frowned, clearly unsatisfied with the answer. She consulted her training manual, flipping through pages that covered standard scenarios but nothing like what she was encountering. The protocols were clear about medical devices, but they assumed a reasonable number of implants in predictable locations. "I'm going to need to verify these items through physical inspection," Williams said, her voice taking on the formal tone of someone reciting policy. "This will require a pat-down and potentially more intrusive screening methods." Rebecca's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd known this moment would come eventually. Every time she flew, every time she went through security, she risked exposure. But she'd hoped that this time might be different, that she could pass through unnoticed, like the thousands of other passengers who traveled every day without their bodies betraying secrets they'd rather keep buried. "Do what you need to do," Rebecca said quietly. Williams began the pat-down, her movements professional but increasingly puzzled as her hands encountered the hard edges of metal beneath fabric and skin. The implants weren't in typical medical locations. They weren't the familiar bulk of hip replacements or the thin lines of surgical pins. They were something else entirely, something that didn't fit the neat categories of civilian medical care. "Ma'am," Williams said, stepping back with confusion written across her face, "I need to call in a supervisor. The placement and number of these devices, it's beyond my experience level." Rebecca nodded, unsurprised. It was always beyond someone's experience level. That was the point. Fletcher returned with another agent, Special Agent Sarah Chen from Homeland Security, whose presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the small room. Chen was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of a person within seconds of meeting them. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with situations that fell outside normal parameters. "Ms. Martinez," Chen said, reading from Rebecca's identification, "I understand you're carrying multiple metallic devices that don't match typical medical implant patterns. Can you provide documentation for these devices?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Documentation implied a paper trail, medical records, insurance claims, all the normal bureaucratic evidence that civilized society used to verify and categorize its citizens' experiences. But some experiences existed outside those neat filing systems, in the shadows where official records were classified, redacted, or simply didn't exist. Rebecca reached slowly into her backpack, her movements careful and deliberate to avoid triggering any additional alarms. From a hidden pocket, she withdrew a worn manila folder, its edges soft with age and handling. The documents inside were few but significant. Medical records that raised more questions than they answered, discharge papers with large sections blacked out, and a single photograph that she'd carried for 3 years. Chen examined the papers with the practiced eye of someone trained to read between heavily censored lines. Her expression shifted subtly as she processed what she was seeing, or more accurately, what she wasn't being allowed to see. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "These records are heavily redacted," Chen observed, her tone neutral but questioning. "That's not my doing," Rebecca replied evenly. Chen studied the photograph. 5 women in desert camouflage, their faces young and determined, standing in front of a building that had been partially obscured by black marker. Only Rebecca was identifiable in the image. The others had been rendered anonymous by whoever had controlled the release of the photograph. "Where was this taken?" Chen asked. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the photograph. The desert sun had been brutal that day, she remembered. The kind of heat that made the air shimmer and turned every breath into an effort. They'd been preparing for a mission that wouldn't appear in any official reports, in a place that didn't exist on any public maps. "Afghanistan," she said finally. "Forward Operating Base Echo 2019. The name of the base seemed to register with Chen, whose expression shifted from professional skepticism to something approaching recognition. FOB Echo had been mentioned in classified briefings, always in connection with operations that carried the highest levels of security clearance. "What was your unit?" Chen pressed. "Military intelligence support activity," Rebecca answered, her voice carrying the weight of someone revealing information she'd been trained never to discuss. "Detachment 7. The words hit Chen like a physical force. Misa Detachment 7 wasn't just classified. It was mythical, the kind of unit that existed in whispered rumors and heavily redacted after-action reports. The kind of unit that handled operations so sensitive that their very existence was undeniable. Chen set down the documents and looked at Rebecca with new eyes, seeing not just another passenger with suspicious metal implants, but potentially someone whose body carried the evidence of sacrifices most people couldn't imagine. "Ms. Martinez," Chen said carefully, "I'm going to need to make some phone calls." The holding room where Chen escorted Rebecca was different from the initial screening area, larger, with reinforced walls and no windows. The kind of space designed for conversations that required absolute privacy. Rebecca settled into the metal chair across from a table that had seen countless interrogations, her posture straight despite the persistent ache in her hip. Chen stepped outside to make her calls, leaving Rebecca alone with her thoughts and the quiet hum of ventilation systems. The silence felt heavy, pregnant with the weight of secrets that had been buried for 3 years. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to remember, just for a moment, what it felt like before her body became a walking collection of evidence. Before Afghanistan, before the implants, before everything changed, Rebecca had been someone else entirely. Growing up in Albuquerque, she'd been the daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher, smart enough to earn a full scholarship to University of New Mexico, determined enough to graduate with honors in electrical engineering. The military had recruited her straight out of college, drawn by her technical aptitude and her ability to solve complex problems under pressure. Those early years had been good ones: traditional intelligence work, analyzing communications intercepts and building technical solutions for field operatives. She'd thrived in the structured environment, earned rapid promotions, and gained a reputation as someone who could make technology work in impossible conditions. Her commanding officers had praised her innovation, her dedication, her willingness to volunteer for the assignments others avoided. It was that willingness that had eventually led her to Misa Detachment 7. The unit didn't officially exist, which made recruitment an interesting challenge. There were no job postings, no formal application process. Instead, candidates were identified through careful observation, their psychological profiles analyzed, their technical skills evaluated, their personal lives scrutinized for vulnerabilities that could be exploited by enemy forces. Rebecca had been approached by Colonel Janet Harrison in the spring of 2018 in a coffee shop off base where the conversation could appear casual to any observers. Harrison was a woman who carried herself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to operating in the shadows, her graying hair pulled back in a style that was professional but unmemorable. "Sergeant Martinez," Harrison had said, settling into the booth across from her with a cup of black coffee, "how would you feel about applying your technical skills to problems that require more creative solutions?" It had been an odd way to phrase a recruitment pitch, but Rebecca had understood immediately that she was being offered something outside the normal career trajectory, something that would challenge her in ways that traditional intelligence work never could. "What kind of problems?" Rebecca had asked. Harrison had smiled then, the expression carrying both warmth and warning. "The kind that don't have textbook answers. The kind that requires people willing to become the technology they're deploying." The phrase had stuck with Rebecca throughout the recruitment process, through the psychological evaluations and background investigations, through the months of specialized training that followed her acceptance into the program. Becoming technology. At first, she'd thought it was metaphorical, about developing such an intimate understanding of her equipment that using it became second nature. She'd learned that Misa Detachment 7 took the concept more literally than she'd imagined. The door opened, interrupting her memories. Chen returned with 2 other agents. A tall man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair who introduced himself as Director Michael Katz, and a younger woman whose ID identified her as Dr. Lisa Warren from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Dr. Warren carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to analyzing classified medical information, her sharp eyes taking in details that others might miss. She wore a navy blue blazer over dark slacks, and her movements had the efficiency of someone who'd spent years working in secure facilities where every minute was accounted for. "Ms. Martinez," Director Katz began, settling into the chair across from her while the others remained standing, "Dr. Warren specializes in military medical technologies. She's reviewed your medical documentation, and she has some questions." Rebecca nodded, unsurprised. The implants in her body represented technology that was classified at levels most people didn't know existed. Having them discovered was always going to lead to uncomfortable conversations with uncomfortable people. Dr. Warren opened a tablet and consulted her notes. According to your records, you underwent voluntary surgical implantation of 14 separate devices over a period of 6 months. The procedures were performed at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, but the specific nature of the devices is classified above my clearance level. She paused, studying Rebecca's face for any reaction. What I can tell you is that the power signatures we're detecting suggest these aren't standard medical implants. They're generating electromagnetic fields consistent with active electronic devices. Rebecca remained silent. There were things she was authorized to discuss and things she wasn't, and the line between them had been drilled into her through months of security briefings. Dr. Warren was fishing, looking for information that Rebecca couldn't provide without explicit authorization from people who operated several pay grades above anyone in this room. The placement of the devices is also unusual, Dr. Warren continued. They appear to be positioned along major nerve pathways, particularly in areas that would interface with the autonomic nervous system. This suggests a level of integration with biological functions that goes beyond anything in the civilian medical field. Director Katz leaned forward slightly. Ms. Martinez, I'm going to be direct with you. We have protocols for handling military personnel with classified medical modifications, but those protocols assume cooperation from the service member. You've been out of the military for 3 years. Your security clearance has been downgraded. Technically, you're now a civilian carrying technology that's classified at levels that require active monitoring. The implications hung in the air like a threat. Rebecca understood what he was saying. She was in a gray area where the normal rules didn't quite apply, where her legal status was complicated by the classified nature of what had been done to her body. I'm not a security risk, Rebecca said quietly. The technology is inactive. It has been since I was discharged. Dr. Warren's eyebrows rose slightly. Inactive. According to our scans, several of the devices are showing power signatures. They're definitely active. Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach. The implants weren't supposed to be active. Part of her discharge process had involved surgical procedures to deactivate the electronic components, leaving only inert metallic structures that would gradually be absorbed by her body over time. That's not possible, she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she realized they might not be true. The persistent ache in her hip, the occasional sensation of electrical current running along her spine, the way her skin sometimes felt hypersensitive to electromagnetic fields, symptoms she'd attributed to phantom pain from the implantation surgeries. Dr. Warren consulted her tablet again. The signatures are definitely consistent with active electronics. Low power, but definitely functional. It's possible that whatever deactivation process was used wasn't completely successful. Director Katz stood and began pacing the small room, his movements betraying a level of agitation that professional composure couldn't quite hide. This complicates things significantly. If you're carrying active classified technology without authorization, that's a federal crime. If the technology has been compromised or modified since your discharge, that's a national security issue. Rebecca's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. The implants had been designed for a specific mission profile, incorporating technology that allowed for real-time biometric monitoring, encrypted communications, and enhanced situational awareness. In the right hands, the technology was revolutionary. In the wrong hands, it could provide insights into classified military capabilities that enemy forces would kill for. I need to contact my former commanding officer, Rebecca said. Colonel Harrison would be able to provide clarification about the deactivation protocols. Dr. Warren and Director Katz exchanged glances. Colonel Janet Harrison was killed in a helicopter crash 18 months ago, Dr. Warren said gently, along with most of the command structure for your former unit. The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Janet Harrison had been more than a commanding officer. She'd been a mentor, someone who'd understood the sacrifices required for the work they were doing. The knowledge that she was gone, that the institutional memory of the program had died with her, left Rebecca feeling suddenly isolated and vulnerable. The crash was investigated, Director Katz continued, but the circumstances were unusual. There's been speculation about whether it was truly accidental. The implication was clear. Mesa Detachment 7 had operated in a world where enemies were capable of sophisticated operations on American soil. The death of key personnel could easily be the result of foreign intelligence services cleaning up loose ends. Which brings us back to your situation, Dr. Warren said. You're potentially the only surviving member of a classified program, carrying active technology that was thought to be deactivated. We need to understand what's happening with those implants. Quote, Rebecca looked around the room at the three faces watching her, seeing in their expressions a mixture of suspicion, concern, and professional calculation. They were trying to determine whether she was a security asset to be protected or a security threat to be contained. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Director Katz stopped pacing and fixed her with a steady gaze. We need a complete medical evaluation of the implants. Full-spectrum analysis to determine their current capabilities and any potential security vulnerabilities. The question is whether you're willing to cooperate voluntarily. The alternative hung unspoken in the air. If she refused to cooperate, they had legal mechanisms to compel her participation. The Patriot Act and its various amendments provided broad authority for dealing with national security threats, and someone carrying unauthorized classified technology definitely qualified. Rebecca thought about her life over the past 3 years. The struggle to find civilian employment that didn't require security clearances she no longer possessed. The physical therapy sessions to manage chronic pain from surgeries she couldn't discuss. The isolation that came from carrying experiences that couldn't be shared with anyone who lacked the proper clearances. She thought about the dreams that still woke her in the middle of the night, filled with images of desert compounds and mission parameters that had required her to volunteer for procedures that permanently altered her body. She thought about the teammates who hadn't made it home, whose sacrifices had been classified into bureaucratic obscurity. Most of all, she thought about the possibility that someone had deliberately sabotaged the deactivation procedures, leaving her as an unwitting carrier of active intelligence-gathering technology. The idea that she might have been walking around for 3 years as a compromise waiting to happen was almost too disturbing to contemplate. I'll cooperate, she said finally, but I want guarantees about what happens to the information you gather. Dr. Warren nodded. The evaluation will be conducted at a secure medical facility. The results will be classified at the highest levels, and you'll be briefed on any findings that affect your personal security. Director Katz consulted his watch. We can arrange transportation within the hour. The facility we're using has experience with this type of unique medical situation. Quote, Rebecca almost smiled at the euphemism, unique medical situation. It was certainly one way to describe having your body turned into a walking collection of classified technology. As the agents prepared to escort her to whatever secure facility they had in mind, Rebecca allowed herself one last look around the holding room. In a few hours, she would know exactly what was happening inside her body, what technology was still active, and what risks she might be facing. What she couldn't know was that the answers would be far more disturbing than any of them imagined. The black SUV that transported Rebecca from Denver International Airport moved through suburban Colorado with the kind of purposeful efficiency that suggested its route had been planned well in advance. Dr. Warren sat beside her in the back seat, occasionally consulting encrypted messages on her secure phone, while Director Katz rode in the passenger seat, his attention divided between his own device and periodic conversations with the driver. Rebecca watched the landscape change from urban sprawl to industrial complexes, then to areas that looked increasingly isolated and secure. The buildings they passed grew more sparse, more utilitarian, surrounded by higher fences topped with razor wire. This wasn't the route to any civilian medical facility. Where exactly are we going? Rebecca asked, breaking the silence that had settled over the vehicle. Dr. Warren looked up from her phone. Cheyenne Mountain Research Facility. It's a Department of Defense installation that specializes in analyzing classified military technologies. They have the equipment and clearances necessary to properly evaluate your implants. The name sent a chill through Rebecca. Cheyenne Mountain was legendary within military intelligence circles, a facility carved into solid granite, designed to survive nuclear war and house the most sensitive operations in the American defense establishment. It was also the kind of place where people disappeared into classified programs and emerged years later fundamentally changed, if they emerged at all. That seems like overkill for a medical evaluation, Rebecca observed. Director Katz turned in his seat to face her. Ms. Martinez, we're dealing with technology that doesn't officially exist. implanted in someone who was part of a program that never appeared in any public records. Overkill is relative when national security is involved. Quote, the SUV approached a checkpoint that looked more like a fortress entrance than a medical facility gate. Armed guards in military uniforms examined the driver's credentials with the kind of thoroughness that suggested they took their jobs very seriously. Beyond the checkpoint, the road wound upward into foothills that had been carved and reshaped to accommodate underground installations. As they passed through successive layers of security, Rebecca noticed the increasing sophistication of the monitoring equipment. Motion sensors, thermal imaging systems, and what appeared to be electromagnetic field generators designed to detect and neutralize electronic surveillance devices. Whatever happened at this facility, it happened without outside observation. The entrance to the underground complex was unremarkable from the outside. A concrete structure built into the mountainside that could have been a maintenance facility or storage depot. Only the elaborate security arrangements suggested its true purpose. Dr. Warren's ID card granted them access through multiple airlock-style doors, each requiring biometric verification and armed guard approval. Inside, the facility hummed with the kind of activity that never stopped. Personnel in military uniforms and civilian lab coats moved through corridors that stretched deeper into the mountain than Rebecca could see. The air carried the antiseptic smell of medical facilities, mixed with the ozone scent of high-powered electronics. Dr. Warren led them through a maze of corridors to a medical wing that looked like something from a science fiction film. The examination rooms were equipped with scanning devices that Rebecca didn't recognize, surrounded by computer workstations displaying data streams that updated in real time. Everything was white, sterile, and intimidating in its technological sophistication. Ms. Martinez, Dr. Warren said as they entered the primary examination room, I need to be completely honest with you about what we're going to discover today. The scanning equipment here is capable of analyzing your implants at a level of detail that wasn't possible when they were first installed. We may find capabilities or modifications that weren't part of the original specifications. Rebecca settled onto the examination table, its surface covered with sensors that immediately began taking baseline readings of her vital signs. What kind of modifications? That's what we're here to determine. Drive, Warren replied, activating a control panel that brought several scanning systems online. But given the unusual power signatures we detected at the airport, it's possible that someone has tampered with the deactivation protocols or even added new functionality to the existing systems. The first scanner that Dr. Warren activated looked like a medical MRI machine, but the readings it produced were far more complex than standard medical imaging. The displays showed not just the physical structure of Rebecca's implants, but detailed electromagnetic maps of their energy patterns and data transmission capabilities. As the scanner completed its first pass, Dr. Warren's expression shifted from professional curiosity to genuine concern. She consulted with a technician who'd been monitoring the readings, their conversation conducted in the kind of technical shorthand that excluded outsiders from understanding the implications. What is it? Rebecca asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Dr. Warren turned back to her, her face carefully controlled. The implants are definitely active, but not in any way that matches their original specifications. They're communicating with each other through encrypted wireless protocols, and they're also attempting to establish connections with external networks. The words hit Rebecca like ice water. External network connections meant that someone, somewhere, might be monitoring the signals from her implants. Everything she'd done for the past 3 years, every place she'd been, every person she'd talked to, possibly even her physiological responses to stress or excitement, could have been transmitted to unknown recipients. How is that possible? Rebecca demanded. The deactivation procedures were supposed to permanently disable all electronic functions. Either the procedures failed, Dr. Warren said grimly, or someone deliberately sabotaged them. But there's another possibility that's even more troubling. She activated a different scanner, this one focused specifically on the electromagnetic emissions from the implants. The readings that appeared on the screen were unlike anything Rebecca had seen during her original implantation process. The communication protocols these devices are using didn't exist when you were first implanted, Dr. Warren explained. They've been updated with new software, new encryption keys, and new transmission capabilities. Someone has been remotely modifying your implants. Quote, the implications were staggering. Rebecca had been walking around for 3 years as an unwitting intelligence-gathering platform, her body broadcasting information to whoever had gained control of the implant systems. Worse, the modification suggested a level of technological sophistication that pointed to state-level actors with advanced cyber warfare capabilities. Director Katz, who'd been observing the examination from an adjacent control room, entered with his phone pressed to his ear. His side of the conversation was terse, professional, and increasingly urgent. "Yes, sir. Active transmission. Unknown recipients. Estimated duration approximately 36 months. He paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. "Understood. We'll implement containment protocols immediately." He ended the call and approached the examination table where Rebecca lay, surrounded by scanning equipment. "Ms. Martinez, I'm afraid your situation has just become significantly more complicated." "More complicated how?" Rebecca asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. "The signals from your implants have been tracked to receiving stations in at least 3 countries that are considered hostile to American interests. You've been functioning as an unwitting intelligence asset for foreign powers for the better part of 3 years. Rebecca felt the blood drain from her face. The idea that her body had been turned into a spy device without her knowledge was horrifying enough, but the realization that she'd been betraying her country's secrets simply by existing was almost too much to process. "That's impossible," she said. "I haven't had access to classified information since my discharge. I work in computer repair. I live alone. What could I possibly be transmitting that would be valuable to foreign intelligence services?" Dr. Warren consulted her scanner readings again. "The implants are monitoring far more than you might realize. Biometric data, location information, audio from conversations, even physiological responses that could indicate stress, deception, or emotional states. They're also equipped with proximity sensors that can detect when you're near other electronic devices or when you encounter specific electromagnetic signatures." The full scope of the violation began to dawn on Rebecca. The implants weren't just transmitting information about her daily activities. They were turning her into a walking surveillance platform capable of gathering intelligence about anyone and anything she encountered. Every time you've been near military installations, government buildings, or even other veterans with security clearances, these devices have been recording and transmitting data, Director Katz explained. Your movements, your conversations, the people you've interacted with, all of it has been potentially compromised. Rebecca thought about the past 3 years, trying to remember everywhere she'd been, everyone she'd talked to. Veterans Administration hospitals, where she'd encountered other former service members. Electronics repair shops, where she'd worked on devices that might have contained sensitive information. Even casual conversations with neighbors who worked in defense-related industries could have provided valuable intelligence to hostile foreign powers. Who would have the capability to do this, she asked. Several candidates, Dr. Warren replied. But the sophistication of the modifications suggests a major intelligence service with advanced cyber warfare capabilities. Russia, China, North Korea. Any of them could have developed the technology necessary to remotely reprogram military-grade implants. Director Katz was already coordinating with his superiors through encrypted communications. "We need to implement immediate countermeasures. First priority is stopping the transmissions. Second priority is determining the extent of the intelligence compromise. Third priority is identifying how they gained access to the implant control systems." Dr. Warren activated additional scanning equipment, devices that Rebecca didn't recognize but that seemed designed for more invasive analysis. "Ms. Martinez, I need to warn you that what we're about to do may be uncomfortable. We need to map every implant in detail and determine exactly what modifications have been made." "How uncomfortable?" Rebecca asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "The deep tissue scanners use electromagnetic pulses to analyze the electronic components of your implants. The process can cause temporary nerve stimulation and muscle contractions. It's not dangerous, but it's intense." Rebecca gripped the sides of the examination table as Dr. Warren initialized the scanning sequence. Almost immediately, she felt a sensation like electrical current running through her body, following the pathways where the implants had been installed. The current wasn't painful exactly, but it was deeply unsettling, like having someone else control her nervous system. As the scanner mapped each implant in turn, Rebecca experienced flashes of sensation that seemed to activate memories she tried to suppress. The desert heat of Afghanistan, the weight of equipment she'd carried during missions, the faces of teammates who hadn't made it home. The implant seemed to be responding to the scanning process by accessing neural pathways that connected to traumatic memories. "Dr. Warren," she gasped, "something's wrong. I'm seeing things that shouldn't be there." Dr. Warren checked her readings, her expression growing more troubled. The implants appeared to have deeper neural integration than the original specifications indicated. They're interfacing with memory centers and emotional processing areas of your brain. The implications were even more disturbing than Rebecca had imagined. The implants weren't just monitoring her activities. They were potentially capable of accessing her memories, her thoughts, even her dreams. Everything she'd experienced, everyone she'd known, every secret she'd learned during her military service could be vulnerable to extraction and transmission. "Can you remove them?" Rebecca asked, fighting against waves of sensation as the scanner continued its work. "That's complicated," Dr. Warren admitted. "The integration with your nervous system is more extensive than we initially realized. Removing them might cause permanent neurological damage." Director Katz returned from another urgent phone call, his expression grim. "We have a bigger problem. Signals intelligence indicates that the transmissions from your implants spiked dramatically when we brought you into this facility. Someone knows you're here, and they're attempting to extract maximum data before we can implement countermeasures." Rebecca felt a wave of vertigo that had nothing to do with the scanning equipment. The realization that she'd led hostile intelligence services directly to one of America's most secure facilities was almost too much to bear. "What happens now?" she asked. Director Katz looked at her with an expression that mixed sympathy with cold professional calculation. "Now we find out exactly what they've learned, and we determine whether you're still Rebecca Martinez or whether you've become something else entirely." The alarm that suddenly pierced the sterile air of the medical wing wasn't the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. It was the urgent, pulsing wail that indicated a facility-wide security breach. Red lights began flashing in the corridors outside the examination room, and Rebecca could hear the sound of blast doors slamming shut throughout the underground complex. Dr. Warren's hands flew across her control panel, her face pale as she watched data streams that were updating faster than human eyes could follow. "The implants are transmitting at maximum bandwidth," she announced, her voice tight with a professional alarm. "They're dumping everything. Location data, facility layouts, personnel information, even the electromagnetic signatures of our scanning equipment." Director Katz was already coordinating the facility's response through his encrypted radio. "Lockdown Protocol 7, full electromagnetic isolation. And get me General Morrison on Secure Line 1. He turned to Dr. Warren. "How long until you can implement countermeasures?" "Unknown," Dr. Warren replied, her attention focused on readings that seemed to change every few seconds. "The implants are using adaptive encryption. Every time our jamming systems adapt to block one frequency, they switch to another." Rebecca lay on the examination table, feeling increasingly like a passenger in her own body, as electrical sensations pulsed through her nervous system. The implants were responding to the facility's attempts to block their transmissions by increasing their power output, and she could feel the effects as waves of current that followed the pathways where the devices had been surgically installed. "Dr. Warren," Rebecca said through gritted teeth, "something else is happening. The implants, they're not just transmitting, they're receiving." Dr. Warren's scanner displays suddenly shifted, showing new patterns of activity within Rebecca's implant network. "She's right. Incoming data streams. Someone is downloading information directly into the implants." The implications hit Director Katz immediately. They're not just extracting intelligence, they're installing new capabilities. This could be preparation for an active operation. Quote, "Through the facility's intercom system, a new voice cut through the chaos. General Patricia Morrison, the installation's commanding officer. Her tone carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions under pressure. This is General Morrison. All personnel not directly involved in containment operations are to evacuate to secondary positions. Dr. Warren, what's the status on neutralizing those transmissions?" Dr. Warren activated her own communication link. "General, we're dealing with technology that's more sophisticated than anything in our threat assessments. The implants are demonstrating capabilities that exceed their original specifications by several orders of magnitude." "Explain." They're not just monitoring devices anymore, ma'am. They've been turned into a distributed computing platform. The subject is essentially carrying a foreign intelligence supercomputer that's networked into hostile command and control systems. The silence that followed was filled only by the continued wailing of alarms and the hum of emergency power systems. When General Morrison spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone who just realized the full scope of the threat they were facing. Dr. Warren, I need you to be very clear about something. Are we dealing with a compromised American citizen, or are we dealing with a foreign intelligence asset that happens to be housed in an American citizen's body? The question hung in the air like a sword. Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the facility's air conditioning as she realized that her legal status, her citizenship, even her basic human rights might be in question depending on how that question was answered. General, Rebecca said, activating the examination room's communication system, I'm still Rebecca Martinez. I'm still the person who volunteered for this program to serve my country. What's been done to me was done without my knowledge or consent. I understand that, Ms. Martinez, General Morrison replied, her tone careful but not unsympathetic. But the unfortunate reality is that your biological identity and your technological identity have become separate issues. We need to determine which one takes precedence in terms of national security. Dr. Warren was studying new data streams that appeared on her displays, her expression growing more troubled with each passing moment. General, we have a new development. The implants are beginning to interface with the subject's motor nervous system. They're attempting to establish direct control over voluntary muscle movement. Rebecca felt the truth of those words as a terrifying loss of control over her own body. Her left hand began to move without her conscious direction, her fingers tracing patterns in the air that seemed purposeful but incomprehensible. The sensation was like being a puppet controlled by invisible strings, her own nervous system hijacked by foreign technology. They're turning me into a remote-controlled asset, Rebecca said, her voice tight with the effort of fighting against the involuntary movements. Someone else is driving my body. Director Katz was already on his radio, coordinating with security teams throughout the facility. We need immediate physical restraints and total electromagnetic isolation. This has moved beyond intelligence gathering into active control scenarios. As security personnel entered the examination room with equipment designed to physically immobilize Rebecca, Dr. Warren made a discovery that changed everything. Her scanner displays suddenly shifted to show patterns that were completely different from anything they'd seen before. Wait, Dr. Warren said, her voice sharp with sudden realization. Everyone stop what you're doing. The security team froze, their restraint equipment halfway deployed. Director Katz paused with his radio halfway to his mouth. Even the facility's alarm system seemed to quiet slightly, as if the entire installation was holding its breath. Dr. Warren? General Morrison's voice came through the intercom. Generally, the implants aren't being controlled by foreign intelligence services. They're being controlled by an American military system. The encryption signatures match classified Defense Department protocols. The words seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Rebecca felt the involuntary muscle movements stop as suddenly as they'd begun, her body returning to her own control. But the implications of what Dr. Warren had discovered were even more disturbing than foreign control would have been. That's impossible, Director Katz said. All American systems with that level of capability would be documented. There's no program authorized to remotely control implanted devices in former military personnel. Dr. Warren's fingers flew across her keyboard as she traced the source of the control signals. The signals are originating from a facility in Virginia, Defense Intelligence Agency coordinates. But the program identifiers don't match anything in the official database. General Morrison's voice carried a new quality, the sound of someone who'd just realized they were dealing with a rogue operation within their own government. Dr. Warren, can you establish two-way communication with whoever is controlling those implants? I can try, General. But if this is an unauthorized program, attempting to make contact could expose our own capabilities. Do it anyway. I want to know who thinks they have the authority to run remote control operations on American citizens without proper authorization. Dr. Warren activated communication protocols that Rebecca didn't recognize, devices that seemed designed to interface directly with the implant network. Within moments, a new voice came through the facility's communication system, crisp, professional, and completely unexpected. Cheyenne Mountain, this is Control Station Alpha. Please identify yourself and explain why you're interfering with an authorized operation. The voice belonged to someone who clearly expected to be obeyed, someone accustomed to operating with the kind of authority that didn't require explanation or justification. But General Morrison wasn't someone who backed down from unauthorized operations, regardless of who was running them. Control Station Alpha, this is General Patricia Morrison, Commanding Officer of Cheyenne Mountain Research Facility. You will immediately cease all remote operations involving the subject in our custody and identify yourself and your authorization for this operation. A pause, filled with the kind of tension that suggested someone was making calculations about how much information to reveal. When the voice returned, it carried a different quality, still professional, but with an edge of something that might have been desperation. General Morrison, this is Colonel David Sterling, Military Intelligence Support Activity. The subject is part of an ongoing counterintelligence operation. Her implants were deliberately reactivated to serve as bait for foreign intelligence services attempting to extract information about classified military technologies. The revelation hit everyone in the room like a physical blow. Rebecca felt a surge of rage that threatened to overwhelm her ability to think clearly. She'd been used, not by foreign enemies, but by her own government. Her body had been turned into bait without her knowledge or consent, her life put at risk to catch foreign spies. Colonel Sterling, General Morrison's voice was dangerously quiet. Do you have authorization from the Secretary of Defense for an operation involving unwitting human subjects? Another pause, longer this time. General, this operation is classified at levels that require special access authorization. I'm not at liberty to discuss specifics on an open channel. Colonel, this channel is encrypted at the highest classification levels available to the United States military. If you can't discuss your authorization here, then you don't have authorization. Dr. Warren was monitoring the communication exchange while simultaneously tracking the implant activity. General, the implants are showing new patterns. Whoever Control Station Alpha is, they're attempting to download everything the implants have recorded and then implement what appears to be a self-destruct sequence. Rebecca felt a new sensation, heat building within her body, along the pathways where the implants had been installed. The devices were being pushed beyond their normal operating parameters, their power output increasing to levels that could cause permanent tissue damage. They're trying to destroy the evidence, Rebecca gasped, fighting against waves of burning sensation that seemed to follow her nervous system. And they don't care if they destroy me in the process. General Morrison's response was immediate and decisive. Dr. Warren, implement emergency countermeasures. Full electromagnetic pulse if necessary. Director Katz, I want a tactical team dispatched to the Virginia coordinates Dr. Warren identified. And someone get me the Secretary of Defense on a direct line. As the facility's emergency systems activated, surrounding Rebecca with electromagnetic shielding designed to block all external signals, the voice from Control Station Alpha returned one final time. General Morrison, you're interfering with a classified operation that has national security implications beyond your clearance level. The consequences of your actions will be your responsibility. The communication link went dead, leaving behind only the hum of shielding systems and the quiet sound of Rebecca's labored breathing as the heat from the implants gradually subsided. Dr. Warren, General Morrison's voice came through the intercom. What's the status of the subject's implants? Stable for now, General. The electromagnetic shielding is preventing external control signals from reaching the devices. But we have a new problem. The attempted self-destruct sequence has damaged some of the implant's safety protocols. They're now potentially unstable. Rebecca looked around the examination room at the faces of people who were trying to determine whether she was a victim, a weapon, or something else entirely. The truth was becoming clear. She was all of those things, and the people who'd made her that way were willing to kill her to keep their secrets hidden. General, Rebecca said, her voice steady despite everything she'd endured, I think it's time we found out exactly what Colonel Sterling and his unauthorized operation have been doing with American citizens. The secure conference room 3 levels deeper in the Cheyenne Mountain complex buzzed with activity that Rebecca had never witnessed before. Pentagon officials appeared on multiple encrypted video screens, their faces grim as they processed the implications of what General Morrison had reported. The Secretary of Defense himself, Thomas Bradley, occupied the center screen, his expression carrying the weight of someone who'd just learned that his own department had been compromised. Rebecca sat at the conference table, still connected to monitoring equipment that tracked the status of her implants in real time. The electromagnetic shielding that surrounded the room prevented any external signals from reaching the devices, but Dr. Warren continued to observe their internal activity with the vigilance of someone watching a barely contained explosive. "General Morrison," Secretary Bradley began, his voice carrying across the secure link with crystal clarity, "walk me through exactly what we know about Colonel Sterling and his operation." General Morrison consulted her briefing materials, documents that had been compiled in the hours since the confrontation with Control Station Alpha. "Sir, according to our investigation, Colonel David Sterling was reassigned to the Pentagon 18 months ago, shortly after the helicopter crash that killed Colonel Harrison and most of the MESA Detachment 7 command structure. She activated a display that showed personnel records and organizational charts. Sterling was given responsibility for legacy technology management. Officially, his job was to oversee the deactivation and disposal of classified devices from discontinued programs, but it appears he was using that access to reactivate and repurpose the technology for unauthorized operations." Rebecca felt a cold recognition as the pieces of the conspiracy began to fit together. The helicopter crash that had killed her former commanding officer, the botched deactivation procedures for her implants, the 3 years of unknowing surveillance, all of it had been orchestrated by someone who was supposed to be protecting classified American interests. "What was Sterling's objective?" asked General Amanda Cross, the Pentagon's Director of Military Intelligence, her face appearing on another screen. "Why use Ms. Martinez as unwitting bait?" Dr. Warren activated her own display, showing complex diagrams of the implant network and its modified capabilities. "Based on our analysis, Sterling was using Ms. Martinez to identify foreign intelligence services that were attempting to acquire information about the MESA Detachment 7 program. The implants were designed to attract foreign attention while simultaneously gathering intelligence about whoever tried to access them." "A honeypot operation," Secretary Bradley said grimly, "using an American citizen as bait without her knowledge or consent." "It gets worse, sir," General Morrison continued. "Our investigation indicates that Sterling deliberately arranged for Ms. Martinez to be in situations where foreign intelligence services would detect her implants. He manipulated her job placements, her living arrangements, even her medical care to maximize the chances of foreign contact." Rebecca felt her hands clench involuntarily as the full scope of the manipulation became clear. Every aspect of her civilian life had been orchestrated by someone who viewed her not as a human being, but as a piece of equipment to be deployed in whatever way served his purposes. "The 3 years of data we've recovered from the implants show contacts with Russian, Chinese, and North Korean intelligence operatives," Dr. Warren added. "Sterling was gathering comprehensive intelligence about foreign technical capabilities while simultaneously feeding them selected information designed to mislead them about American defensive technologies." General Cross leaned forward in her chair. "And the attempted self-destruct when we discovered the operation?" Sterling realized that exposure of his activities would reveal not just the unauthorized use of Ms. Martinez, but also the extent to which he'd been manipulating foreign intelligence services, General Morrison explained. He was willing to commit murder to prevent that exposure. Secretary Bradley was quiet for several moments, processing information that had implications far beyond a single rogue operation. When he spoke again, his voice carried the authority of someone making decisions that would reshape military intelligence operations. "General Morrison, I'm authorizing you to take whatever steps are necessary to secure Ms. Martinez and gather evidence of Sterling's unauthorized activities. I'm also ordering an immediate investigation into every personnel transfer and reassignment that occurred after the Colonel Harrison incident." Another screen activated, showing the face of FBI Director Sarah Chen, a different Chen than the Homeland Security agent who'd first questioned Rebecca at the airport, but someone whose presence indicated that the investigation was expanding beyond military channels. "Mr. Secretary," Director Chen said, "we've been monitoring the situation in Virginia. Our surveillance teams report that the facility Dr. Warren identified has been abandoned within the last 6 hours. Sterling and his associates appear to have implemented a comprehensive destruction protocol." Rebecca felt a mixture of frustration and fear. The people who'd manipulated her life were erasing evidence of their crimes, potentially escaping accountability for what they'd done to her, and possibly to others. "Director Chen," Rebecca said, speaking directly to the FBI official, "Sterling mentioned authorization levels above General Morrison's clearance. Is it possible this operation had approval from someone higher in the chain of command?" The question created an uncomfortable silence in the conference room. The possibility that Sterling's activities had been authorized by officials at the highest levels of government was almost too disturbing to contemplate, but it couldn't be ignored. Secretary Bradley answered carefully, "Ms. Martinez, that's exactly what we intend to find out. But I want you to know that regardless of who may have authorized this operation, what was done to you was wrong. The use of unwitting American citizens in intelligence operations violates every principle our military is supposed to uphold." Dr. Warren consulted her monitoring equipment. "Mr. Secretary, we have another issue. Ms. Martinez's implants are still potentially unstable. The attempted self-destruct damaged their safety protocols, and we're not certain about the long-term effects of the modifications Sterling made to the original technology. What are you recommending, Doctor?" "We need to attempt surgical removal of the implants, but the integration with Ms. Martinez's nervous system makes that extremely risky. There's a significant possibility of permanent neurological damage." Rebecca had been dreading this moment since learning about the depth of the neural integration. The implants had become part of her body's systems in ways that made removal potentially more dangerous than leaving them in place. "What if we don't remove them?" she asked. "Then you remain potentially vulnerable to remote control by anyone who gains access to the proper command protocols," Dr. Warren replied honestly. "Sterling may be gone, but the technology he developed could be replicated by other hostile actors." Secretary Bradley consulted with advisors who remained off camera. "Ms. Martinez, this is ultimately your decision, but I want you to know that whatever you choose, the United States government will provide whatever medical care and support you need." Before Rebecca could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the facility again. Not the security breach alerts they'd heard earlier, but evacuation warnings that indicated an immediate threat to the installation itself. General Morrison's radio crackled with urgent reports from her security teams. "General, we have multiple aircraft approaching the facility. Military helicopters, but they're not responding to identification requests, and they're not on any authorized flight plans." Through the conference room's internal communication system, the voice of the facility's air defense coordinator cut through the chaos. "General, the approaching aircraft are broadcasting Sterling's authorization codes. They're claiming authority to extract classified personnel and materials." The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Sterling hadn't abandoned his operation. He was attempting to retrieve Rebecca and the evidence of his activities through direct military action. "That's impossible," General Cross said from her Pentagon screen. "No one has authorization to conduct operations at Cheyenne Mountain without my explicit approval." Quote, "Unless Sterling has been operating with authorization from someone above your level," Rebecca said quietly, voicing the fear that everyone in the room was thinking but not saying. Secretary Bradley's expression hardened. "General Morrison, I'm ordering you to treat any unauthorized approach to your facility as a hostile action. No one has authority to extract personnel or materials from Cheyenne Mountain without my direct approval." "Understood, sir," General Morrison replied, already coordinating with her defense systems. "But General, if Sterling does have higher authorization, this could escalate into a confrontation between different elements of the American military." The possibility of American forces firing on other American forces was almost unthinkable, but the situation had moved beyond normal military protocols into territory where institutional loyalty and personal obligation conflicted with chain-of-command structures. Dr. Warren was monitoring her equipment with increasing urgency. "General, Ms. Martinez's implants are responding to something. They're showing activity patterns, similar to what we saw when Sterling was attempting remote control." Rebecca felt the familiar sensation of electrical current following her nervous system, but this time it was different. Not the invasive control she'd experienced before, but something that felt almost like communication. "Dr. Warren," Rebecca said, concentrating on the sensations the implants were generating, "I think they're trying to tell me something. The patterns feel like Morse code." Dr. Warren quickly activated recording equipment to capture and analyze the electrical patterns the implants were generating. Within moments, her displays showed the translation of the signals Rebecca was receiving. "Sterling not alone. Cabinet-level authorization. Trust no one above Morrison." The message sent a chill through everyone in the conference room. If the implants were correct, Sterling's operation had authorization from someone at the highest levels of the American government, possibly someone in the president's own cabinet. Secretary Bradley's face had gone pale as he processed the implications. "General Morrison, I'm implementing special containment protocols. No information about this operation leaves your facility without my personal authorizations. And General, if those helicopters attempt to land, you have my authorization to use whatever force is necessary to prevent unauthorized access." Quote. As air defense systems around Cheyenne Mountain activated, preparing to defend against an attack by other American forces, Rebecca realized that she'd become the center of a conflict that threatened to tear apart the institutions she'd spent her life serving. "General Morrison," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them, "I think it's time we found out exactly how high this conspiracy goes." The Tactical Operations Center, 3 levels below the conference room, had become the nerve center for what was rapidly evolving into an unprecedented crisis within the American military establishment. Rebecca found herself surrounded by screens displaying real-time satellite imagery, communications intercepts, and tactical assessments that painted a picture of institutional conflict she'd never imagined possible. General Morrison stood before a wall of displays, coordinating with military units across the country, as the implications of Sterling's conspiracy became clearer with each passing hour. The helicopters that had approached Cheyenne Mountain had been turned away by air defense systems, but intelligence reports indicated that similar extraction attempts were being made at other secure facilities. "Ma'am," called Major Lisa Rodriguez from her workstation, "we're receiving reports from Fort Meade, Langley, and Peterson Air Force Base. All 3 facilities report unauthorized attempts to access classified materials related to discontinued MESA programs." Rebecca watched the coordination efforts with a mixture of awe and horror. Her discovery at Denver Airport had triggered a nationwide security response that was revealing corruption at levels she'd never suspected. The implants in her body had become the key to unraveling a conspiracy that threatened the integrity of American intelligence operations. Dr. Warren approached with a tablet displaying the latest analysis of Rebecca's implant activity. "Ms. Martinez, the devices are continuing to receive and decode encrypted communications from Sterling's network. We're essentially using your body as an intelligence-gathering platform against the people who created that platform." The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca. The technology that had been used to violate her autonomy was now being turned against its creators, providing evidence of their crimes and revealing the scope of their operations. "What are we learning?" Rebecca asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Doctor." Warren activated a display that showed communication patterns and organizational charts that had been reconstructed from the intercepted data. "Sterling's operation is much larger than we initially realized. He's been running similar programs with at least 12 other former MESA personnel, veterans who thought their implants had been deactivated but who were actually being used as unwitting intelligence assets." The revelation hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She wasn't the only victim of Sterling's manipulation. Somewhere else in the country, other veterans were living with the same violation of their bodies and their trust that she'd endured. "Where are they?" Rebecca asked immediately. "We're working to locate them," General Morrison replied from across the operations center. "But Sterling's network has been operating for 3 years with sophisticated security protocols. Some of the subjects may not even realize they're being monitored." A new voice joined the conversation. Deputy Secretary of Defense Amanda Hayes appearing on the main communication screen with an expression that suggested she'd been dealing with crisis management at the highest levels of government. "General Morrison," Deputy Secretary Hayes began, "I've briefed the President on the situation. He's authorized you to take whatever steps are necessary to shut down Sterling's operation and protect the affected personnel." Rebecca felt a moment of relief at knowing that the conspiracy hadn't reached the very top of the government, but Deputy Secretary Hayes' next words tempered that relief. "However, we've discovered that Sterling has been operating with authorization from someone using Deputy CIA Director Margaret Foster's access codes. Director Foster is currently unreachable, and we're investigating whether her authorization was legitimate or whether her access was compromised." The possibility that Sterling had penetrated the highest levels of the intelligence community added new urgency to the situation. If he had access to CIA authorization codes, there was no telling what other capabilities he might possess. "Deputy Secretary," Rebecca said, "the implants are still receiving data from Sterling's network. Is there anything specific you need us to try to access?" Dr. Warren consulted her monitoring equipment. Ms. Martinez, attempting to actively probe Sterling's systems, could trigger additional security protocols. The implants weren't designed for offensive intelligence gathering. But they weren't designed for a lot of what they're doing now, Rebecca pointed out. If Sterling modified them beyond their original specifications, Maybe we can push those modifications even further. General Morrison approached the medical monitoring station where Rebecca sat connected to Dr. Warren's equipment. Ms. Martinez, what you're suggesting could be extremely dangerous. If Sterling detects active probing from your implants, he might attempt another self-destruct sequence. Rebecca looked around the operations center at the dozens of personnel working to unravel Sterling's conspiracy and protect other victims of his manipulation. The weight of responsibility she felt was familiar, the same sense of duty that had led her to volunteer for the original MISA program, the same willingness to accept personal risk for a mission larger than herself. General, 3 years ago I volunteered to have my body modified with experimental technology because I believed it would serve my country. Today, I'm volunteering to use that same technology to stop someone who's perverted it for criminal purposes. Dr. Warren shook her head. The risks are too high. If we lose you, we lose our only window into Sterling's network. And if we don't take risks, how many other veterans remain unknowing victims of his manipulation? Rebecca countered. How many other people are walking around with their bodies turned into spy devices without their consent? The debate was interrupted by urgent alerts from the facility's communication systems. Major Rodriguez called out from her workstation. General, we're receiving encrypted communications on Sterling's frequency. Someone is attempting to contact Ms. Martinez directly. Dr. Warren quickly activated recording and analysis equipment as the implants in Rebecca's body began receiving data that translated into audio communication. The voice that emerged from the speakers was one Rebecca recognized, Colonel David Sterling himself. Ms. Martinez, Sterling's voice carried across the operations center with surprising clarity. I know you're listening. I know you're working with General Morrison and her team to disrupt my operations. Rebecca felt anger surge through her, but she forced herself to remain calm. Sterling, why don't you explain to everyone here why you thought you had the right to turn American veterans into unwitting intelligence assets? Quote, because sometimes national security requires sacrifices that people aren't willing to make voluntarily, Sterling replied without hesitation. The MISA program created capabilities that were too valuable to simply deactivate and discard. The intelligence we've gathered through your implants and those of your fellow veterans has prevented terrorist attacks and exposed foreign intelligence operations. General Morrison activated her own communication link. Colonel Sterling, this is General Morrison. Even if your objectives were legitimate, your methods constitute criminal violation of the rights of American citizens. You will surrender yourself and your associates for investigation immediately. Sterling's laugh carried an edge of desperation. General, you don't understand the scope of what we're dealing with. The authorization for my operations comes from levels you don't have access to. People who understand that sometimes the greater good requires uncomfortable choices. Then explain it to us, Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the anger she felt. Help us understand why you thought destroying my life was justified. For several moments, Sterling was silent. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality. Not the confident authority of someone certain of his righteousness, but the exhaustion of someone who'd been carrying a heavy burden for too long. 3 years ago, foreign intelligence services began targeting former MISA personnel, trying to extract information about classified technologies through torture, bribery, and coercion. We lost 2 veterans to suicide after prolonged harassment. Another was kidnapped and held for 6 months before we could recover her. The operations center fell silent as Sterling's words painted a picture of threats that hadn't been revealed in any of the official briefings. The implant reactivation program was designed to give us early warning when foreign services attempted to target our people, Sterling continued. Instead of waiting for them to be victimized, we turned the veterans into intelligence-gathering platforms that could identify and track hostile operatives. Dr. Warren consulted her data streams. He's telling the truth about the targeting of former MISA personnel. I'm seeing intelligence reports that corroborate attacks on at least 5 veterans over the past 3 years. Rebecca felt her understanding of the situation shift slightly. Sterling's methods had been wrong, criminal, and a violation of everything the military was supposed to represent. But the threats he'd been responding to were real, and the people he'd been trying to protect were her former teammates. Sterling, Rebecca said, even if the threats were real, you didn't have the right to make that choice for us. We're veterans, not victims. We could have been consulted, could have volunteered, could have been part of the solution instead of unknowing tools. And how many would have volunteered to carry active surveillance technology for the rest of their lives? Sterling asked. How many would have been willing to sacrifice their privacy, their relationships, their chance at normal civilian lives? All of us, Rebecca said without hesitation. Every single one of us who served in MISA knew what we were signing up for. We knew the risks, we accepted the sacrifices, and we trusted our commanders to use us honorably. What you did wasn't protection. It was betrayal. The communication link fell silent for so long that Dr. Warren began checking her equipment to ensure the connection was still active. When Sterling finally spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd finally admitted a truth he'd been avoiding. "You're right," he said simply. "What I did was wrong. The authorization I claimed to have, it was fabricated. Deputy Director Foster never approved this operation. I manipulated her access codes and created false documentation to justify actions I knew were criminal." General Morrison leaned forward. "Colonel Sterling, are you prepared to surrender yourself and provide full disclosure of your operations?" "I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to protect the veterans who are still carrying active implants," Sterling replied. "But General, there are people who know about this operation who won't be satisfied with my surrender. People who will see Ms. Martinez and the others as loose ends that need to be eliminated." The implications of Sterling's warning sent a chill through the operations center. Even with Sterling's surrender, Rebecca and the other affected veterans would remain targets for anyone who wanted to prevent exposure of the conspiracy. "Then we'd better make sure they're protected," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the determination of someone who'd found a new mission. "And we'd better make sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else." Quote, as coordination efforts intensified to locate and protect the other affected veterans, Rebecca realized that her ordeal at Denver Airport had been just the beginning of a larger battle for accountability and justice within the institution she'd served. The implants that had been forced upon her without consent had become tools for ensuring that such violations never happened again. 6 months after the confrontation at Cheyenne Mountain, Rebecca Martinez stood in a medical conference room at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, surrounded by 12 other veterans who shared her unique and unwanted distinction. Each of them carried implants that had been secretly reactivated without their knowledge, their bodies turned into intelligence-gathering platforms in a conspiracy that had shaken the foundations of American military ethics. The room itself had been specially prepared for their gathering: electromagnetic shielding that prevented any unauthorized monitoring, medical equipment that could provide immediate care if needed, and security arrangements that acknowledged the unique threats they continued to face. These weren't just veterans meeting for a support group. They were witnesses to crimes that powerful people still wanted to keep hidden. Dr. Warren, who had become the lead researcher on what was now officially called the Sterling implant incident, addressed the group with updates on their medical status. "The good news is that we've successfully deactivated the surveillance and control functions in all of your implants without causing neurological damage. The bad news is that complete removal remains too risky for most of you." Rebecca looked around the room at faces that reflected her own complicated relationship with the technology embedded in their bodies. Master Sergeant James Thompson, whose implants had been used to monitor Chinese intelligence activities in San Francisco. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, who'd unknowingly provided surveillance of Russian operatives in Miami. Technical Sergeant Robert Chen, whose body had served as a listening post for North Korean communications in Seattle. Each of them had discovered that their post-military lives had been entirely fictional, their civilian careers and personal relationships manipulated to place them in positions where foreign intelligence services would make contact. Each of them had spent years believing they were building normal lives while actually serving as unknowing pawns in Sterling's unauthorized operation. "What's the status of the investigation?" asked Sergeant First Class Angela Wright, whose implants had been monitoring Middle Eastern terror networks in Detroit. The question carried weight beyond simple curiosity. All of them understood that their safety depended on how thoroughly Sterling's network had been dismantled. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the military attorney who'd been assigned to oversee the legal proceedings, consulted her briefing materials. "Colonel Sterling is cooperating fully with investigators and has provided documentation of everyone involved in the operation. 17 military personnel and 6 civilian contractors have been arrested, and we're confident we've identified the complete network." Rebecca felt some relief at the news, but she knew that the formal legal process was only part of addressing what had been done to them. The psychological impact of learning that years of your life had been orchestrated by someone else, that your most intimate relationships and personal decisions had been influenced by covert manipulation, wasn't something that could be resolved through court proceedings alone. "What about the foreign intelligence services that were monitoring us?" asked Technical Sergeant David Lee, whose implants had been tracking Iranian operatives in Los Angeles. "Do they know that we were unknowing participants in Sterling's operation?" Dr. Warren activated a display showing declassified intelligence assessments. According to the CIA's analysis, most foreign services believed they were successfully extracting intelligence from former American military personnel. They didn't realize that Sterling was feeding them a mixture of real and fabricated information designed to mislead them about our actual capabilities. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. While Sterling had violated their rights and manipulated their lives, he'd also been using their unwitting participation to conduct successful counterintelligence operations against America's enemies. The ethical complexity of the situation made it difficult to process their anger and their sense of violation. "Have there been any attempts to target us since the operation was exposed?" Rebecca asked, voicing the concern that all of them shared. Colonel Hayes' expression became more serious. "There have been 3 confirmed attempts by foreign operatives to make contact with members of this group. In each case, our security protocols prevented any actual contact, but it confirms that you remain persons of interest to hostile intelligence services." The ongoing threat wasn't surprising, but it was sobering. They would all need to live with enhanced security measures for the foreseeable future, their civilian lives permanently altered by their unwitting participation in Sterling's conspiracy. Dr. Warren consulted her medical files. "I want to discuss something that may provide some positive perspective on your situation. The implant technology that was used on you, despite being deployed without consent, has led to breakthroughs in legitimate medical applications." She activated another display showing research data and clinical trial results. The neural integration techniques that Sterling's team developed have been adapted to help veterans with traumatic brain injuries, spinal cord damage, and other neurological conditions. The technology that was used to violate your autonomy is now being used, with full informed consent, to restore function to veterans who need it. Rebecca felt a complex mixture of emotions as she processed this information. The violation of her body and her trust had contributed to medical advances that could help other veterans, but that didn't excuse or justify what had been done to her and her colleagues. "Are any of you considering participating in the legitimate research programs?" Dr. Warren asked. The question sparked discussion among the group. Some felt that any further participation in experimental programs was unthinkable after what they'd endured. Others saw an opportunity to ensure that their suffering contributed to something positive for future generations of veterans. "I've been thinking about it," admitted Sergeant Santos. "If my experience with these implants can help develop better treatments for veterans with brain injuries, maybe something good can come from this nightmare." Master Sergeant Thompson nodded. "I feel the same way. We can't undo what was done to us, but we can make sure it leads to something that actually helps people, instead of just serving someone's covert agenda." Rebecca had been wrestling with the same question for months. The implants that remained in her body represented both violation and potential, technology that could be used to help others if deployed ethically and with proper consent. "Dr. Warren," Rebecca said, "if we did participate in legitimate research, what guarantees would we have that we wouldn't be exploited again?" "Congressional oversight," Colonel Hayes answered, before Dr. Warren could respond. "The Sterling incident has led to new legislation requiring congressional approval for any research involving experimental implants in human subjects. Multiple oversight committees, independent medical review boards, and mandatory participant advocacy." Dr. Warren added, "Plus, any research participation would be entirely voluntary, with full disclosure of risks and benefits, and with the absolute right to withdraw at any time. Everything that Sterling's operation violated would be built into the protections for legitimate research." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Secretary of Defense Bradley himself, whose presence in the room emphasized the ongoing importance of their situation at the highest levels of government. He was accompanied by Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the newly appointed Director of Military Medical Ethics, a position created specifically in response to the Sterling incident. "Ladies and gentlemen," Secretary Bradley began, "I want to personally apologize for what was done to you by people who were supposed to protect and serve alongside you. The betrayal you experienced strikes at the heart of everything our military is supposed to represent." He paused, looking at each of them individually. But I also want you to know that your courage in coming forward, your willingness to cooperate with investigators, and your continued service to your country even after being so badly betrayed represents the best of what it means to be an American veteran. Dr. Walsh stepped forward with documentation that had been prepared for each of them. We're offering each of you compensation for what was done to you, along with lifetime medical care for any issues related to your implants. More importantly, we're offering you positions as advisors in the development of ethical guidelines for future military medical research. Rebecca examined the documents, seeing not just financial compensation, but recognition of their expertise and their right to help prevent future violations. The offer represented something more valuable than money: the opportunity to ensure that what had happened to them never happened to anyone else. There's one more thing, Secretary Bradley continued. We're establishing the Veterans Technology Rights Foundation, an independent organization that will monitor military medical research and advocate for the rights of service members who participate in experimental programs. We want each of you to serve on the Foundation's board of directors. The offer was both honor and responsibility. They would become the guardians of protections they'd wished existed when they needed them, advocates for veterans who might face similar situations in the future. Over the following hours, the group discussed the offers, shared their concerns, and began planning how they could transform their victimization into protection for others. The conversation wasn't easy. Trust didn't come naturally to people who'd been so profoundly betrayed by institutions they'd served faithfully. But gradually, consensus emerged. They would accept the advisory positions, participate in developing ethical guidelines, and serve on the Veterans Technology Rights Foundation. Most importantly, they would ensure that their story became a permanent reminder of what happened when military authority was exercised without accountability. As the meeting concluded, Rebecca found herself standing at the window overlooking the Walter Reed campus, watching young service members going about their daily routines. Some were patients recovering from injuries sustained in defense of their country. Others were medical personnel, dedicating their careers to healing those who'd sacrificed for others. Dr. Warren approached, carrying final medical reports that documented the current status of Rebecca's implants. "How are you feeling about everything?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, she'd been an unknowing victim, her body violated without her consent, her life manipulated by people who viewed her as equipment rather than a human being. Today, she was an advocate, an advisor, and a guardian of protections that would prevent future violations. "I'm feeling like I finally understand what my real mission is," Rebecca said. "Sterling turned us into unwitting weapons against our enemies. Now we're going to become willing shields for our fellow veterans." As she prepared to leave Walter Reed and return to a civilian life that would never be entirely normal again, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A routine airport security screening had revealed violations that threatened the integrity of American military institutions. The discovery of unauthorized technology in her body had led to the exposure of criminal conspiracy at high levels of government. But most importantly, her willingness to fight for the truth had protected other veterans and established safeguards that would prevent future abuses. The implants that had been forced upon her without consent had become tools for ensuring that consent would be required for all future military medical research. The technology embedded in her body would remain there, inert but present, a permanent reminder of both violation and vindication. Every day for the rest of her life, she would carry physical evidence of what happened when military authority was exercised without accountability. But she would also carry the knowledge that her suffering had led to protections for others. Walking out of Walter Reed into the bright Virginia sunshine, Rebecca Martinez carried herself with the dignity of someone who'd transformed personal violation into public service, individual suffering into institutional reform. She'd learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on foreign battlefields, but in conference rooms and congressional hearings where the rights of those who serve are protected or betrayed. Her story would be told in military ethics classes, in congressional oversight hearings, and in the policies that govern how America treats the men and women who volunteer to serve their country. Most importantly, it would be remembered as proof that even when institutions fail, individuals can still choose to do what's right. The implants that had once made her a victim had become the foundation for making her a guardian. And in a world where technology increasingly blurred the lines between enhancement and exploitation, guardians like Rebecca Martinez would ensure that those lines were drawn with respect for human dignity and individual choice. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about making sure the same wrongs never happen again. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies, but protecting your allies. And sometimes the most important technology isn't what gets implanted in your body, but what gets embedded in your institutions to ensure they serve the people who sacrifice for them. Rebecca Martinez had learned all of these lessons the hard way. Now she would spend the rest of her life making sure others didn't have to. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.